I'm so excited to be joined here by the one and only Jen and Kyle Carter. And we are going to cover the topic of trailering again this evening. I'm sure you guys remember a couple of weeks ago, we covered trailering. We got through quite a bit of questions on trailering, but there were a lot more where that came from. So we wanted to cover this for a part 2. And I told Jen before this, maybe a part 3, maybe a part 4, just depends on how long Kyle decides to go with his answers. So we'll see where this evening takes us. But wherever it goes, I'm sure we'll all learn something. Kyle and Jen, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We're
Thank
excited.
you.
Yeah. And if you're attending live, as always, feel free to put any questions that you have for Jen and Kyle in the chat, and I will be sure to relay those to them. And I mean, if you guys are up for it, we'll kind of just dive right into this because we covered a lot of like the which trailer to buy and kind of how to differentiate between the different trailer types on the last session. And I'm going to pick up on the kind of trailer selection and setup topic just because we have a few more questions on that. And then we'll get more into like loading and trailering with different types of horses and whatnot. And we'll see what we can cover here. As a starting point, can you guys, and I, we covered a bit of this on the last one, but we got a specific question on non-negotiables when buying a trailer when you're doing a lot of long trips.
Ventilation.
Yep.
Major. People don't, if you go and get in your trailer at a hot show and close up all the doors and just have the windows open, you're going to see how hot it gets back there. They need tons of ventilation.
Oh, and we lost them. Okay, well, if you're attending live, I apologize. Hopefully they'll be back shortly.
Sorry.
You're good.
We're back. Ventilation. If you go into your trailer and close it up like you would if you were traveling down the road, even if you're up north and you put a couple of horses in there, you're going to see how hot it gets and how stuffy it gets. So ventilation is hugely important. Horses have huge lungs and they require clean air to be able to be healthy. So you do have to keep up on that. Whether you add more vents in the roof or stuff like that, insulation on the roof helps a lot. And then obviously safety is hugely important. It shouldn't have protruding things. It should be built well enough that the horses can bang away in it and kick on them and not tear stuff up. Like a lot of places they'll put thin rubber on the wall halfway up and be like, oh look, we've got rubber on the walls, and one swipe with a horse with shoes and the rubber is hanging all tattered. Well, it doesn't really, it just doesn't make much sense. So make sure that the quality is good. And then I'll all say, I think I said it in the last one, they'll all say, oh, it's made with aircraft aluminum. I mean, they make cans out of aircraft aluminum. They just thin it out. So don't listen to that and think that means that your trailer is like specially built. It's just aluminum. Make sure that it's built well, welded well, and all of that. Like, I mean, obviously we have a bunch of horror stories and stuff, but like we did buy a trailer one time. It was a really good brand, but someone had hauled it with a very big truck, and it actually broke the welds at the base of the gooseneck. So we took it to a show after we bought it, and we sold a really nice horse that ended up. I thought it could go to Kentucky, and it did end up at Kentucky. And we sold it for that trailer because we didn't have cash in hand. And I mean, I knew a girl in my barn that liked it. I walked down to the barn aisle, and I was like, "You want him? You can buy him for this price." And
You guys getting the recording error?
Yeah, but
maybe
I troubleshoot it.
Just maybe just unplug your mic. See if that does it. Okay. And you don't need to plug it back in. Let's just do your computer mic.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, so it's not letting me get rid of the notification.
I can hear you. I can hear you totally fine. You're recording.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll
Well, we
just leave
can't
it
see
then.
you. We'll just leave it.
You could you can press refresh on your screen if you want.
Well, it's fine.
Yep.
We don't need it. So,
Okay.
anyways, that trailer, we bought it. We went to the first show, I think, and we had to send the horses back with someone else because the whole gooseneck part had separated and was like the door was falling off, and you had to get
Yeah.
it all re-welded and stuff. So unfortunately, sometimes you learn from those mistakes, and that's how you get your information and your knowledge. But it's not how everybody wants to go through it. So make sure the welds are good. It's been kept up on well. And that people haven't inappropriately used them, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good transition into Taylor's question. She's asking, what are your opinions on buying privately versus from a dealer? And what question should you ask to not sound like an idiot?
Well, I personally prefer buying through a dealer because many reasons. You might pay just a little more, but they usually streamline the process a bit like buying a car. They'll take care of the trailer tag transfer and all that. If something goes wrong, you usually have a little recourse there, whereas with a private person, maybe not so much. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier to buy through a dealer. They're trying to sell you something. You do pay a little bit more for that. But I always like buying private because I always feel like I can do a better job getting a better deal, that sort of thing, and I can actually talk to the person who's had the trailer and understand what it was used for, how it was used. You know, if I buy from a dealer, we've done that a few times. We bought from manufacturers, from dealers, and when we're buying from a dealer, I like to buy them before they put them on the lot. So like we've always done really well when we've gone in and the thing looks like a complete disaster. They haven't pressure washed or anything, and I can look at the stuff that matters. And I mean, I usually would get like $2,000 to $3,000 better on the price of it. But if you're buying there, you're paying for that. Now, the only thing is if something goes wrong, like Jen said, you have a little bit of recourse. But honestly, they're not gonna. You don't hear about dealers like doing incredible jobs taking care of you at the end of it. And with that, though, it is easier to bitch about a dealer than it is to bitch about a private sale. So you can kind of make a bigger commotion on, to your friends and whatnot, which might make you feel better about paying a little bit more.
And what questions do you guys ask, either private or dealer?
Private, I always like the trailer I was describing that broke apart while we were driving it. I had actually gone through that with a trailer I owned, and I'd pulled the trailer with a bigger truck that was just too heavily sprung for. Now I'm talking like a 5-ton truck. It was too heavily sprung for the trailer, and it broke the gooseneck. So I knew they'd pulled this trailer with a similar type truck. I thought it was probably fine, and it turned out it wasn't. So I knew exactly what we were dealing with when it all went on, and a little bit the risk of it. And I also knew how much they'd used that trailer, and it had been used really hard. It was a good trailer for us for many years after we got it repaired, but I knew what I was going into that way. And you get a sense of that directly from them. With the dealer, they're going to tell you, it's not about dishonesty, but it's easy to sell a story. So, oh, this guy owned it and it never got used or whatever. Right. But if you're buying it from someone, sometimes they come on the market and people have we have one here that's literally done 3 shows and it's about to go in to be sold, maybe 4 shows. So it's legit when we say it hasn't been used, but the dealer is going to say that about whatever they want. So, when were the axles done? And that's where you do save on a dealer, because they will often have done the axles, checked the brakes, done the electric, made sure all the lights are working, all the niggling little things are a bit of a pain, but that's where I prefer to buy private and pay a little less and be able to then just take care of those things myself. But as I get older and time becomes more of a problem, I do find myself wanting convenience and paying for that, because, like when I had 5 horses and, maybe 2 people to teach, it's easy to kind of do all the legwork and work on the trailers and stuff, but not so much now. It takes a lot of time. when, the tires, you can get the information right off of those. What the people pull them with, everybody's always like, what do you pull it with? And they always want to buy dualies to pull like 2-horse trailers. And yeah, dualie's nice to pull a 2-horse trailer with, but it's not necessary. You can pull a 2+1 quite comfortably with I mean, with a 3/4 ton for sure, and some half tons. The big thing is that you want to make sure that your trailer stops when you're pulling it. Getting it going is usually not that difficult. So when were the brakes done? What sort of condition they're in? But the dealer should have pulled all that apart and looked at it. But it doesn't mean, remember, the guy working in the shop, there are good shops, but there's a lot of people that work in the shop that they'll pull off the tire and look at the brakes, and they won't know any better than you might if you looked at the brakes. So they might be like, it's fine, and they just slap it all back together. They'll be like, oh yeah, we did a 52-point inspection, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they inspected it to a standard. So if you have a good dealer, we're pretty lucky in this area. We got a ton of good dealers, and it's funny because with that, I know, I'll throw a name out there. Frank DeBella up in Pennsylvania always does a really good job prepping the stuff to resell it. There's a dealer in Virginia that does the same thing. I only know these dealers because of knowing people that have bought from them and interacted with them and finding how they're really quality. At the same time, there's a few out there that you wouldn't want to go near, but if you're about to buy something, it's really hard when you see something you like and you really want it, and the dealer's telling you all the right things, to stop yourself and be like, yeah, that's not right. It's not up to the stuff, and or I can't trust this person. So I think visual yourself is really more important, or take someone along that knows something about metalwork, your farrier, someone who ships a lot, someone who, and then, is always like, everybody's an expert, but do they really know what's a concern and what isn't,
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. A lot of what you're saying, it sounds like, it's like the same as when you're buying a horse, like ask the right questions, bring someone else along who knows more than you do. Okay. Debbie is wondering about ramps versus step up. She's asking if you have a preference and what are the pros and cons?
Oh, definitely ramps. I find the horses, once they're used to them, are so much better with them. I know a lot of horses will step down fine and stuff, but I prefer ramps.
Yeah, I think over time ramps tend to be. Here's what I would say is, it's really horse specific, and that's the reality. Is some horses are better when they walk right up to the edge of the floor and climb into the trailer, and sometimes they're good. Some of those horses are good coming out, but the reality is some horses don't like that. And once they're on a ramp and starting to move up onto the floor, if they don't like that sensation and you have to teach it to them, you can always park a trailer with a ramp on ground that makes your ramp level. So you park the tire into a ditch a little bit, so that then they walk on the ramp just like they're walking on flat ground, and they usually will go into a trailer much easier than that. So typically the people that say, they hate ramps, they prefer to have, just a step up, it's because they haven't figured out how to use the ramp as effectively as a step up can be for some horses, if that makes sense. So that's an important part of it. And then when they're backing down, it's such a pain when they step off the ramp when they step off onto, the void of where their hind leg is, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, and they jump back in. And it sometimes can be like, we're talking about teaching horses to do this, it can be a bit of a pain. And with a ramp, they typically will go down a little bit easier. And again, you can put it on level ground so that the ramp's level, so that they'll actually walk off of it and on it quite comfortably. So a ramp's better for that, first of all. Secondly, if it's on a side, you're always going to have a ramp. And the ramp on the side helps add structural stability. And on the back, it'll do the same thing. When you put a ramp up, that door will also assist the balance on the frame around that door. And we've had doors that didn't have ramps where the welding broke around the top of the frame, and then the doors would want to open, so we had to chain the doors closed to come home from a show. because it didn't have stability anymore. And if you have a ramp, and ideally you actually have doors and then a ramp, that's one thing I like about the angle halls, is usually that way. Well, that's super safe because the horses don't come out the ramp, basically. So you're looking at that too. When a horse is leaning against the doors and it's like kicking and getting obnoxious and, puts 1,200 pounds of genuine effort into it, they can take that door and open it. And there's all sorts of stories of those sorts of things happening, which are terrifying. Whereas with a ramp, it hits the ground. There is one more, piece of protection if that were to happen. So yeah, I'm with Jen. I like the ramps better. I hate lifting them.
Yes, that sucks.
But if you do it enough times, and you feel like you got a bit of a workout. So there's the part of that.
Okay. Super helpful.
Oh, one
Go
other
ahead.
thing. When you have full doors on the back, you're going to see that those usually just have a small window above them. When you have a ramp at the back, they usually have 2 shutting doors above them. So those shutting doors can be left open to allow more ventilation. And if you've got a horse that's obnoxious, you can close those top doors to make sure that you have a little more security so they don't try to kick over top of the ramp at the back. But it makes a big difference when those doors are open. We always have ours latched open. Until recently, we have one horse that we don't trust not to kick and maybe get over top of it. So she'll have her door closed, and the next one, the other door will be open, but you get a lot more wind going through the trailer then. So it gives you more options as to how to play around with it,
Absolutely. I remember I was driving behind you guys once, and for anybody listening, my mare Val was in the back of your guys' trailer, and she was kicking over that back ramp, and I was like, okay, cool. This is great. It was fun to watch. Okay. On that topic, trailer maintenance and safety. How do you guys monitor your horse's safety and comfort while on the road? Do you use cameras or other technology?
Well, we've used cameras and they're great. Now, that's what I would get, a camera. You can then see what's going on in your trailer all the time. Our trailer at the moment does not have it does have a camera. It's in a box in the gooseneck that I haven't installed it. But it's a little hard in our trailer because it's an 8-horse. And so you need 2 cameras really to see the whole trailer. But camera's the best. I mean, you're going to love it. You'll never regret putting a camera in there. When we used to have our horse box and we had a camera in that, I mean, it's just so satisfying to be able to just check on them like that. And then I think last time I mentioned the wheel temperature monitor, and I don't have it in front of me what the name of that was, but that would be another priority. I'm sorry, I kind of missed what was the rest of that question?
How do you monitor your horse's safety and comfort while on the road?
Put someone back there with them for a couple of trips. I mean, I know that, there we go. And Kyle's going to jail. But I grew up out west, and traveled over the mountains a lot and that sort of thing. And we would actually sleep in the gooseneck, and the trailer we had, you could see the horses from that point, because there was no tack room or anything. And that was really informative because you learned how they traveled, and we'd be back there for like 8 hours, 10 hours, that sort of thing. And so you really get a sense of how horses travel. And then you've got to remember, if you're in a straight load trailer, stopping and starting is actually not that dramatic to a horse. But if you're going around a corner, it's quite more dramatic because they're narrow and they get tippy. So always go slower around the corners. But it's really good and illegal to put someone in the trailer and drive around with them if they're going to haul a horse, so they can understand of how loud it is, how the braking matters, how the turning matters. All of that stuff is really, it really does kind of wake you up to what they're going through. And it's amazing how loud a lot of trailers are when you're back there, driving down the road. I think it's always important, obviously, to, you have to visually check the horses. And if you're traveling with greener horses, like, we're pretty fortunate because we start with our events and our shows are very local. So we actually get to see them. We get to work off the trailer, and we're talking like a 10 to a 40-minute trip and it just educates them to it so easily. And if we're going on a longer trip, we have to leave Florida, which you have to stop anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours from the farm to cross the border and get papers checked. So you actually get out, you walk by, peek in on them. Oh, you know, our doors, our trailer, you can open the doors and check the horses quite quickly. But typically what happens is you'll be driving down the road and you'll feel things move, you'll stop, you'll get out, you walk back there, and all of a sudden they're all looking like perfect angels, and you miss it, which is why the cameras are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Amy, if we're going to kind of transition over to some horse health and comfort during travel, Amy is wondering about tips on helping ensure that her horse doesn't lean up against the butt bar or door while trailering. She said he ships well, hardly moves his legs in the trailer, but likes to lean up against the butt bar, rear door, rear of the shipping stall the entire trip. And it happens in both straight load and large trailers with single stalls where some of the horses travel backwards.
Well, Amy, what I would do is if you don't have a child, hire someone to sit back there on the ramp and beat him senseless every time he leans on the trailer door. No, honestly, that's a really good question, because it happens a lot. Some horses really like to put their butts on the doors or walls to support themselves.
Yeah.
If you're in a straight load, when they do that, at least they equal pressure. When they're on a angle haul and they lean into the wall, you'll see horses come off angle haul sometimes with an enormous hematoma on one butt cheek, because when their wall's on an angle, their hips aren't. And so they push into their right side more than their left. On the back door, what you can do, I mean, you can't really necessarily train them away from it. And I don't even know that I would worry about training them away from it. But obviously they rub their butts, they rub their tails raw. I mean, you feel bad for them, and then you're kind of like, why are you doing this to yourself? But they do lean into pressure, and then they're very good at tolerating pain. So they'll be rubbing themselves completely raw, and you think, you know, I don't know why they do that. They should be hurting. They should step away from it. But honestly, they're very stoic, especially some of them. And so they'll do that to themselves, and it doesn't seem to bother them. And I know it bothers them, but they just are tougher than us by so far.
Yeah.
But what you can do is if you can put them in a like a 4-horse head to head, you turn them around backwards, and typically they don't do it as much in that. If you can't do that, if you can set the butt bar forward another like 8 inches, they'll lean into the butt bar, but at least then it's just like sort of lower on where their butt is, and it doesn't hit the door then, or the wall or the ramp. And why that matters is, if you're putting pressure on the ramp, I mean, those welds can break, and so it does make it a little bit more risky. And then the other thing is that butt bar, because it's a bit lower, they don't rub the middle of their tail raw, and they don't rub the butt cheeks on either side raw, because typically what's lower, and it almost catches them. And this comes back to trailer design. When you're looking at trailers, they don't give you extra room at the back because they're trying to save money on materials and build, and nobody notices until they're shipping their horses. And all of a sudden, when their horse is in there, the horse is trying to find more room. And so how you can modify it by bringing that butt bar forward might not work in your trailer, because it might be set to, like, there's a standard length of horse that they measure for. And that's, again, like I said in the first episode, when they're designing trailers, the people designing trailers, it's a little bit like when they design cars, and they're like, look, like I've got a car, a very small car that's got a back seat that I can't sit in. It's worthless, but it was designed as a back seat. And of course they're like, well, you need this amount of room to be able to call it a back seat. And they do the same thing with trailers to some extent. And the bigger the trailer allows the horses to move around a bit more.
Got it. She's also asking about tail wraps. Do you think they're worth it in cases like that?
Yeah, we used to use them. You can get the quick Velcro ones that are awesome. They wear out, and then when you have a lot of horses, they're hard to get them all on there. So we kind of went away from them, but absolutely, if you have one horse, they're great.
Yeah, and we don't that's the other thing, is I think it comes down to, like, when I designed our trailer, I drew it on a floor in the barn for about 10 years, I kept chalking it on a floor, walking a horse in, measuring every trailer I had or saw that I thought was appropriate to figure out exactly the distances I needed. And I can honestly say we've not had a horse rub its tail in all the time we've had this trailer.
Maybe one, but like, I mean,
but
you're
we-
talking years and years with lots of horses and
Yeah,
hundreds
where
of
we used to
trips,
have that
so,
happen
yep.
a lot more. With the tail wrap,
Mhm.
though, what Jen recommended is absolutely the one to go with is a
Mhm.
Velcro standard tail wrap, because if you wrap like we used to when I was in Pony Club and when I was younger, everything was about we always wrapped when you're shipping, and so you wrap it with a elasto, what is it called?
Like a
Ace
ace bandage, yeah.
And I know of at least 2 or 3 horses that the person put it on too tight, strangled the tail,
Yeah.
and the tail fell off. And I don't mean like the hair fell out. I mean like it had, a 3-inch bump on its butt instead of an actual tail. So you've got to be somewhat careful. Whereas what Jen was recommending, it doesn't. That's not really an issue.
Yeah, it's just like a neoprene solid tail wrap that just goes underneath and Velcros over. It's great. They're easy.
Yeah. And then it's so much fun once you get to the show after like a 6-hour drive and it's covered in poop,
Yeah,
and you
it's
get to
great.
put your hand on
Yeah.
there and pull it open, and it's awesome.
And then
Just
put it
good
back
fun.
on at the end of the weekend
Mhm.
with the poop on it still. It's nice.
And by that point, you're just getting ready for dinner and your hand's still covered in horse poop. It's just, it's just delightful.
The things that you just like don't care about once you're around horse, I just like it's so wild. If it was anything besides like horse poop, everyone would be losing their minds.
Yes.
That tail wrap situation is horrific. So that is really
Yeah.
a scary thought.
Yeah.
But it was always really satisfying. Like I always loved, even when I was grooming and I had them, wrap the tail before they were going into the ring so that it looks
Mhm.
nice and everything, which we don't do that anymore either. But it was always so satisfying to grab it onto it at the top and just
Mhm.
slide it off the bottom. Like it made me feel so happy.
Yeah.
Whatever works.
Whatever floats your boat, Kyle. Okay. Sam is wondering about increasing the comfort level of older horses that still get hauled.
I don't think it changes at
No.
all, because if you are trying to, you're trying to make all of them as comfortable as possible. So, the older horse, you always want to keep sort of status quo. I will say there's one other thing I think that's probably worth mentioning. If we're going on a long trip with a horse, we actually run them fluids
Yeah.
before they go. We didn't mention that in the last one. I don't know why it slipped our minds, but if you had an older horse and you were going on a longer trip,
Run them fluids.
yeah, and if I'm going to a big competition, we run them fluids. Like we have the vet come out. It's IV. When I was younger, the first time I saw someone run fluids, I was like, oh my God, they're so cruel. And now I'm like, wow, pre-hydrating makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So we'll do it on a really long trip. We'll do it before they go, and then when they arrive, just to make sure that they're up to, because I don't find that they drink very well in the first 8 hours of a trip. Well, that's a long time to not be hydrating. So
And I think probably one of the biggest contributions to shipping fever is dehydration for horses. So
yeah.
their immune system gets depressed, they're more vulnerable. So keeping them hydrated is probably key.
Yeah.
So anyway, you can do that. There's a lot of good products on the market you can do to help them drink more as well if you don't want to run them fluids. So
It's something I've thought about quite a bit. Like obviously we put shavings down in the trailer, but mostly is to catch so that they are comfortable taking pee. Some horses won't pee on a trailer, and that's, you have to know this stuff. But I've wondered recently why we're not using pillow mats in the trailers, because like we'll, in a longer trip, we'll deep bed so that they're really on top of a lot of shavings, and it makes you feel so good. And then of course they paw them all into the stall. Well, not all of them, but some of them, the ones you really are trying to take care of, they paw them in underneath and they're standing on the rubber mat, which is fine. Horses are designed to stand. They're designed to walk around on hard footing and stuff. But I just kind of wondered for quite a while why we're not, like the pillow mat companies, why they're not just making the size that goes in the trailer, so you can just drop that in there and then you just throw a little bit of thin shavings on top to catch the urine, and then the whole time the horse is bouncing along on this beautiful pillow mat. So contact one of those companies and see if they'll build one of those for you, because I do think that would make a big difference.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. Okay, so Sarah was asking about how to avoid shipping fever. Is your answer just the hydration pre-trip?
Oh, no. There's a lot of things, and sometimes you can't avoid it at all. What we found is if you can do a longer trip in one go rather than overnighting, and people, it's hard, I know, because people get tired, they want to overnight, but the horses actually do better if they just get it all done. Because we used to ship down from Canada. It was a 24-hour drive, and we would stop halfway because, you get too tired, and that makes sense. But they're always their immune system's a little depressed after that first day. And so wherever you stop, they pick up things easier, or they're dehydrated, or they get stressed. So there's a lot of things that can contribute to shipping fever.
Yeah, and I would agree with, like, when I used to drive out from, that was when we were on the East Coast, but when I used to drive out from Calgary, like Bromont was a 52-hour trip. And a couple of times when I was younger, I was always like, oh, I'll stop, more often because that'd be easier on them. And by the third night of stopping, those poor horses would get off the trailer. First night they wouldn't rest. The second night they'd be tired. The third night you're pulling them off, and they're just subject to pick up anything.
Yeah.
And so in the end, what I would do is I would drive as far, like I would do one stop in a 52-hour period, and it's awful on us. But if you think, as long as the horse is in a comfortable
Yeah.
trailer, I mean,
Yeah.
they're so much better off just staying in their place in big stalls than coming off, and that's when I've always found that's when the shipping fever is more likely to happen.
And I think we said it in the last one, but they've got to be able to drop their head down periodically to drain everything out. If you keep their head up the whole time, it's just a recipe for disaster. They've got to let their sinuses drain.
And so that means clipping that's the other thing is, and look, we always have good people coming in and working for us, and we have, people that we're training that want to be horse people. And I'll walk in the trail and I'll be like, this one's clipped up wrong. This one's clipped here. It should be clipped there. Like, if you're on a longer trip, you want to clip it to the top ring, not the one closer to their nostrils. And you want to have it on a low ring, which most trailers don't have, it doesn't take much to add that in there. Like, it's not that expensive, but a low ring where the cross tie will go to, and and then clip to the back of that. The horses can get their nose quite low then. If it's a trailer where the feeder is right in front of their face and the wall's in front of that, you just have very restricted airflow, and they can't lower their nose. And on those trailers, it is better to take them off, let them, every, honestly, if you could do it every few hours, take them off and just let them lower and get the nasal passages cleared out, that would be great. Otherwise they'll end up sounding like Jen.
Good one.
That was the problem. We shipped her recently and she didn't get to bring her head down.
Fair. Makes sense. What signs of stress or discomfort do you watch for in your horses during transport, and how do you address them?
I think if you know your horse, and this is going to say, but I don't know all of my horses as well as I used to, but I know horses, and you start to see a dull look in their eye. You see, and some horses always have that look. And so you kind of have to know that, but you can start to see, that look in their eye. If they have a lot of, if their eyes are really runny and mucky because there's, the dust isn't clearing out in the trailer. You think about it, that's the problem, is you've stuck them in this place with hay nets that, I don't care what you do, there's always gonna be a little dust in there, and then the shavings are kicking up dust, and there's truckers going by you with diesel. And so if their eyes are mucky and runny, and then if their eyes are dull, if their noses are draining, and I would say yellow mucus it starts to get very alarming. Take their temperatures as well, as much as possible. You have to do that safely, which also can be a bit of a problem. But watching the temperature is the easiest indicator that doesn't require any skill. And then knowing horses, and everybody thinks they know their horses and that they know horses, but I mean, some of the stuff I hear is just complete nonsense. I have a person I teach that horse doesn't sweat, and they said to me that they only get hot when they get emotionally upset, and I'm like, it's not sweating. Like, there's no way it can. But people want to make up little stories and stuff. Be honest with yourself. If you're not sure about the horses, make sure you get to know them. The pinch test on the skin isn't the best to determine hydration, but it does give you some sense of it.
Their mucous membranes are a good one. If they're really dry, they're probably a little dehydrated. You want to they don't have to be like slimy, but if you're poking on it and it's your thumb sticking to it, they're probably dehydrated.
Yeah, and then the color of that when you push in, that the capillaries refill to the right color quickly.
Yep.
That stuff you need to go over with your vet, because we can talk about it, but it's not. It's a visual thing. You probably want someone to show you that, and then the other thing is if it feels that way, if you just kind of take their tongue and kind of feel on that, you get a sense of whether if they're drying up in there.
Their body condition, if you're on a long trip, you can really see how much tucked up they get, or that can be an indication of stress. Some horses just get tucked up depending on how long the trip is, but usually that's because they aren't drinking enough.
Like when we shipped Gus out to Montana last year, and we shipped him commercially with a very good shipper, and he arrived there, and he'd really tucked up on the trip, but within about 6 hours he was back to normal sort of round, and that has to be from dehydration. And we had him get fluids before he left and when he landed there, or when he arrived there. And so that you can see the top line changing, you can see the ribs changing, and it doesn't mean that it's a long-term thing. It's usually like it, in my experience, probably 70% of the time in 24 hours, it's sort of back to normal. So watch that, because once that's starting, you have an indicator of potential things going wrong. We must have done so well that they dropped us.
I guess.
Do you have your phone over here?
Yeah.
And I was on mute. I apologize.
I was like, did we do something?
No, I'm sorry. That whole time. Okay. I was like, what did I do wrong? Okay. Erin says she has a little straight load trailer that is pretty roomy, but the downside is it does not have an escape door. She said she's hauled single horses in it, but hasn't hauled her two in there yet. Her question is how to deal with the horse that wants to rush off the trailer. It's been fine when there's just one horse in there, but she doesn't want both trying to get off at the same time.
Wow.
So it doesn't have an escape door? Is that what you said?
She said it doesn't have an escape door.
So how is she? I mean, I guess I'm trying to, I've been in trailers with that. Like, I'm just trying to visualize this. Like, does she have to climb up from the back of the trailer to the front to get to it?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's so dangerous.
No, that's all I could think.
As far as them rushing back, I don't think the escape door, that is like,
I know. I can't picture it. I don't know what's happening either.
Yeah. Okay. That's all right. So I'm going to assume it's one of those trailers that you can't get into the horse. There's no way to stop a horse from coming off fast. Just be really careful when you lower that ramp or open that door, because if they decide to bolt off, you are going to get hammered with that door. My suggestion would be you practice with all of the ones you're going to ship with to get them super comfortable. Like, there is a reason horses get good at something, is because you practice it. And if you were to have one that was panicky and rush off, in my experience, when they do that, it just makes them more panicky the next time. They don't go the next time, that was really stressful, but I'll just settle down this time. So, but I have had that where I've had to climb up in between the horses to get to the front to get them to move backwards because they wouldn't come off the back of they wouldn't unload. And I mean, I also know of like so many stories of people getting their heads bashed in, getting kicked, and that sort of thing. And
Yeah, you don't want to be behind them.
no, and I mean it's just that there's no way around it there if they won't come off. And then I one time in England was in a trailer with Parker when he was being shipped off a course because he'd hurt his leg, and I was in there with him, and he was like, I mean, literally jumping all over me, where I was like, this might be how I die. Ben, there was no way to get away from that. And so that's really the scary part is the horses, take your time teaching them, first of all, how to deal with it. And then be careful not to ship someone's horse that you're not certain of with that, because it can make your trailer seem much more unsafe when that's going on.
If you have an option to ship a horse with like if you have one that's nervous, ship it with like a quiet deadhead. We have an ancient pony that teaches most of our horses how to load and ship for the beginning, because she is just like, this is fine. And they learn from each other.
Yeah.
So if you have one that's nervous, try and find a quiet one to ship with it.
You can also put because now that you mentioned, I had a trailer for quite a while that had that where there was no groom store. And I remember having a really, really long cotton rope that like a 20, 30 foot one that when we were unloading and loading with certain horses, we'd put it on them so you could just kind of keep the same tension with them on and off. That was my dad kind of, I don't know where he got it, how he figured that out, but that way you could keep control, because you untie them, you open the door, and if they bolt off, then you're trying to catch the rope, and all of a sudden they're running around the showgrounds. And I mean, it's a treat to watch, but it's not so much fun when it's your horse.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Stacy and Kristen have similar questions. I'm going to start with Stacy. She said, my horse is anxious on the trailer. We're getting better about loading to leave, but when we're at our event, we have trouble reloading to go home. She said, I don't have the opportunity to take him off property more often and give him the time and space that he needs. Any tips or tricks for in the moment, or is it just patience and time?
Oh, I hate that feeling.
I always, whenever it happens, because look, it happens. Yeah. I mean, it happens.
It happened to us recently.
Yeah, I had one I was supposed to pick up at a show we were at. I rode it for someone, and then they were going to drop it off here to be trained. It wasn't ready. It was rain, wasn't it?
No, it was one of those.
Yeah, it was from a really good breeder who's provided, sent us just a really bunch of nice horses. And anyway, and we got to the show and it would not load. And I was like, you're going to have to figure out how to get it to my farm, because this right now, as of now, it's not at my farm. It's not my problem. I will deal with it once we're home. So with a horse like that, I mean, it's so stressful, but what I would really do is I would work it at home. I'd load it, feed it on there, even drive it around on your farm, down the road, back, then unload it, then load it back up and feed it again, so that it feels really like this trailer's a good place. If we loan you our pony, she'd train it in no time to sort that out. But I feel for you, because whenever we've had that, we did have one recently, and it's like, so, and then of course everybody's there
watching it.
Yeah, they don't usually try to help us anymore or anything, but everybody's there giving you suggestions and judging you for not being able to do it. But horses are going to do stuff like that. Your best chance is to think of it like it's probably as important or more important than actually putting in the riding work with it. Because if you can change its feeling about all of that, you're really going to make a difference in that horse's life. And I mean, look, the Laws had one. We ended up, they sold to a client of theirs that then ended up riding with me, but we went to Young Riders with it one time, and it was shipped it out commercially, and it went to the first place we were going to go before we shipped it on to the next place, and it would not load again. And this was historic with this horse. One time Leslie had to ride it home, it took him 2 hours to get home. He had to ride it back from a cross-country schooling thing because it just wouldn't load. So don't judge yourself too much, because Leslie's one of the best horsemen I know, and that horse put them through hell
we have one of our homebreds who, when he was younger, he was so obnoxious in the trailer, and so we just would start like what Kyle said, load him up with a buddy, drive him around the farm, even just down our dirt road, which is half mile and back. And you know what? He started to go, oh, this isn't that big a deal. Now, not every horse is going to be like that,
No.
but it certainly made a difference for him. And like he said, with all our young ones, if they're nervous, we'll feed them on the trailer, put them on there, feed them lunch. Like they start to associate it with good things rather than stressful, like going to a horse show. So if you have any option time to just, like he said, maybe take away something else and just work on, and getting it really comfortable in the trailer and not associating it all with going to a horse show.
And I will say as well, like there is no judgment here on it. Like the amount of time that you get to do it right now, the last sort of couple of years, if we have a horse here that's going to be difficult that way, it's like, I don't know what we're going to do, because we don't have the time that we used to do to really, work through that. So, everything to me comes down to making sure that it's not a non-stressful thing. There's been multiple times where we've had horses here where we're going to a show and they're bred here and everything. We're like, oh my God, we haven't loaded it, and try to teach it to load in the dark and all of that. And I mean, luckily it's worked out sometimes.
Normally Kyle has the stories, but my favorite story was we have a homebred that our daughter rides now, but he was going to Jersey to do the 4-star, and Kyle was in England with Parker. So I was here to get the horse loaded, and Buck Davidson offered to come over and pick it up and ship it to Jersey for us. So his groom drove over at like 2 a.m, but of course no one tells me, right? So the girl working for us, it's like, oh no, I'll deal with it. They spent 2 hours trying to load this horse to start on its 18-hour drive to the thing. Oh my God, they finally called me. Luckily, I knew the horse and I knew what it would take, but they were trying to load him on a dark trailer. It had no lights on, and he was our one mistake that we didn't load as a young horse. So he was always a little opinionated about loading. And I just kind of took the rope, got into him a little bit, and what do you know, he jumped right on. But they had spent 2 hours trying to load this horse in the dark. If I would have been that groom, I would have been like, I'm sorry, I'm leaving your horse. Like, I have 18 hours to go drive. I don't need this. But we learned after that, all our homebreds, they load when they're foals, they load when they're young. Don't ever leave it too late.
And that's the other thing, is that one would lead, like, and it's so it would be so embarrassing. They'd be trying to load it. And this would happen. It happened that night, but it's not like the first time it had happened as far as like here, but you'd walk over to the barn and they'd be trying to load it, and you'd grab the lead rope and go, come on now. And he'd just follow you in if he knew you, but the grooms, he'd just be like hell with. So again, no judgment. Like some of them, we actually bought that one a special trailer because he wouldn't load on a 2-horse straight load that we own. And he was like going to team sessions and stuff. And I was always driving the 8-horse trailer with 1 horse on it. And finally I'm like, this is ridiculous. We might as well have a 2+1 that he'll load on. So obviously we're not that good at what we do.
Yeah. This is a struggle for everybody, which I think actually makes people feel better than anything. It's not them. It just happens. Kristen has a similar situation, but she does a lot of practice sessions, and she's like, it still remains a problem. She's wondering if her horse might be a candidate for a calming supplement or even a little ACE at home only to get past this.
Anything that's going to make them feel relaxed. Yes.
Better living through chemicals for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, try that for sure.
Talk to your vet about what would be the best thing. But I mean, look, the reality is that if they're stressed about it, nobody's happy. They're not happy. You're not happy. And it doesn't get it better. It's a bit like telling someone to calm down. It doesn't work. So if you have to do something like that, do that. There was a device they had for a while that I will say, like, people twitch and stuff. We don't do a lot of stuff, but it was called a stabilizer. It went over their head and then under their lip, and it's made out of it is a rope, but then it had like plastic where it would touch the horse, and that thing was incredible. And I bet you that would be, I mean, if, you can clip it on easy, you can tighten it to whatever you want. And it just would get the nerve under their lip and then over top of their poll and just create a little bit more peace. And so stuff like that. but rescue remedy, which is, and you have to give like three cc's at least to a horse, but that's something they make for people. They sell it at GNC. Some horses it works with. And then the other thing is, and this is really important. And I mean, like I said, we bought a trailer for a horse. So sometimes you have to kind of think outside the box and figure out what's going to work best. Like on our trailer, we have horses that travel better in certain stalls. We try to figure that out so that they're not a problem. And right now, like I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were at a show and Jen and I were talking and we're just like, thank God we don't have any horses like that. And like right now we're so lucky because they're out there and what you're dealing with, you just have to think about him or her. Like, how can I make her as happy as possible in this environment so that she gets over it? And then you usually don't have to keep, giving them ACE or whatever, and again, training that in the off season. But if you're training that and they get really stressed out, it's a problem. We had one come last year. A lady wanted to send it in for me to train. And I was in a bit of a mood. I was busy in the morning. I'd finished riding, but I had to teach it at 1. It was supposed to be there at, 11:30 or 12. It showed up late. And the horse is like comes down the driveway and the trailer's rocking and it's slamming back there and like it's losing its marbles. And she pulled it off the trailer and I go in the barn and it's like striking and again, really just losing it. And I was like, you know what? And I've never done this before in my life. And I was like, I'm not dealing with it. There's so many things here that need to be sorted out. She wanted to send it in for like a month or 2 months and sell it. And I'm like, the very first thing is you have to get it to be something that's, not civilized in behavior, but so that it's not such a stress case. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm done. I'm not gonna take your horse that is now 7 or 8 years old, had been a stallion, cut late, and you've never given it the very first bit of grant. She was honest. I mean, she was honest when she called about it, but I was like, you're so far behind the 8 ball for me to deal with it because I don't have the time to do it. I knew that. And she went to load that horse back up and it was like, I want to live here. I'm never going on this trailer. And I watched her from a distance for a while, so ineffectively deal with it. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the stuff I always see at shows where someone's doing that. And I'm like, I used to be like, I'm going to help you. And now I'm like, I'm going to avoid you at all costs. If you're a client, I'm going to jump in my truck and drive down the road. And finally I had to go over and I had to clear her trailer, take all the stuff out of it. Like I'm talking partitions and everything, load it, walk it through a couple times and then load it and put the partition where it was out of the way and then put the partitions back that were there. And I'm just like, get it out of my farm now not because it's not trainable, but because I know how much time it's going to take. And that on top of the time I need to deal with it, because it also had few other issues when you rode it. And I was like, you know what? No way. That's going to take me 3 hours a day for 6 weeks. And I don't have 3 hours. So.
Yeah. Okay. Grace is asking for like in the moment, loading tips. Like when you do have a horse that's just like not doing it. She said, obviously practice makes perfect, but I'd love to know any advice for helping horses in the moment who don't want to load all of a sudden. She's also asking for etiquette around helping other people load at shows.
Okay, well, so these are great questions. Yeah. Like they're just like so. Okay, so first of all, as far as loading advice, I can tell you this because I am the worst at this. Make sure you have enough time. Like I'm always like, I'm leaving at 9, I'm getting to the show at 9:45. My first horse is at 10:20 because I'm like, I don't want to waste any time doing anything other than just doing the very bare minimum to get ready. And that has caught me so many times where like even 10 minutes late, then you're in trouble, right? So you go over and you're stressed. So give yourself plenty of time. Like ideally give yourself 2 hours to just kind of be like, I'll load him. Well, maybe I'll unload him and then I'll reload him. And then maybe I'll unload him again and reload him. And now the whole thing has become a habit process that you're going to actually probably have him feeling pretty good about it in time, not necessarily in the first one. So that would be my biggest bit of advice, is make sure you have enough time to really handle what might come up. Because even on some days, you're going to have horses that just, that are normally good, not want to go on. And then, and again, I hate to, but like the type of trailer, our trailer is really easy to load on, because if you have one that doesn't want to load, you can open a whole corridor from the back to the front without taking all the partitions out. So you can walk them through. And that's the thing, is if you keep them walking, they usually are pretty good. So we'll walk them through 3 or 4 times and then walk them in, put them in the stall that's most appropriate for what maybe their behavior is. We had one last year or the year before that when it was sent in, I wouldn't back up. So when you put it in the center load, it would go in there, and like, I'm pretty big and I can push, I can push pretty hard, but I can't push a horse into a place. And so he'd come in from the back to his stall, then we'd batten everything down. Like, but we designed it so that
you could do that.
So you could do that. So there was never, so that all those problems we dealt with, we had an option for, and it just made everything easy,
And if you're really lucky, your horse will be food motivated, and then you just have lots of food, lots of treats. We've done that a lot.
Yeah. Following that's where our pony is so great, because they'll, following a buddy, and if they can follow it nose to tail all the way through, which most trailers don't allow that, horses will load with that. I mean, God, there's so many different techniques to loading a horse. If one is really stubborn, and I mean, I'll probably catch flack for this, but I will try to find someone of a like size and strength as me. And obviously there's no way to muscle a horse to do anything, but we'll lock hands behind them and put our hands just above the hock. And look, do not do this, get kicked, and then go, Kyle told me to do this. All right. This is all, but we'll lock hands just above their hock, and walk forward. So their hind legs walk forward. If the hind legs come forward, you can sometimes get them then to move their front legs forward. So you close them up from the back, and then you're not actually moving the body, but you're moving their feet, and then their feet will go on. And so there's 1,000 different techniques to use to load a horse that are little tricks. There's no part of me other than that one that would want to necessarily put them out there, just because if it goes wrong, when it doesn't work, you need to think of another thing and another thing. But lowering the stress level is huge. I know there's a bunch of trainers out there that are like, people are like, oh, they're great, they always can get one loaded. But, I also know some of those trainers that are recommended that are natural horsemen, and everybody's like, oh my God, they're the best. And I know one of them that gave a horse away because it was too hard to shoe, because they didn't train it. I'm like, it was a good horse. It was like a good prelim horse. It was going up the levels, and it was too much trouble. So they got rid of it. And it's like, the idea of training difficult horses is to be able to train them through these things. And that's a bit of, I think, it's always amazing when someone that knows a little more than you does something, because all of a sudden it seems like they know everything, but it's just not the case. So on that one, I would suggest for ideas is talk to a bunch of professionals privately, and they can give you some advice. I will say that cotton rope thing that we had for our trailer, part of it was because then the horses couldn't go backwards as easily. But I will say, looking back on it, I mean, it was attached to their halter, but it was like, you can't pull a horse to do something. So it created probably more issues than it solved, because we didn't deal with the horses as well as we should have. It worked, but it was substandard working. And as far as etiquette for helping people, like, I'm not kidding. I used to jump in and help, and I don't think honestly, I don't think it ever didn't work, that I wasn't able to help someone get their horse on the trailer. But I just recognized over time, everybody comes with their ideas on what they think how it should load. And like I said, the one I left at the show that one time, she was a good, she was a decent rider. She knew enough, but she just knew enough not to actually be able to fix the situation. And I'm like, you know what? It's on you then. But you can't give advice to someone or educate them or any of those things, because people come with their preconceived ideas on what needs to happen. So I avoid trying to help someone as much as possible. Sometimes people will be like, okay, can you help me like I had someone do it a few years ago that I taught her one lesson, and I was so good that she never came back. And like 6 months later, I was at a show and the same horse. It was pretty, like I had to teach her how to lunge it when she came in for the lesson because it was so obnoxious. And we got through and it was going quite well at the end of the lesson, but she didn't come back. And then I'm at a show and I saw her having trouble loading the horse. And I'm like, and she actually came over to me and was like, can you help me get him on the trailer? And it was just the same thing from what I'd seen in the lesson. I actually was like, I finally gotten to this point. I was just like, Sinead's over there and Tick's over there, and he's a natural horseman, so maybe he can help you do it. He's probably got a lot more better ways to do this than I do. And I was like, because I've got to go get on a horse or whatever, and I know I had something to do, but that's something you want to do at home, and you don't want to go and help someone that doesn't know you and know your, what you're about. Like, I'm going to swear. I promise you, I'm going to swear. And I'm going to probably be loud because, as everybody knows, I'm loud. But that doesn't, like, it's not, if the person's like, oh, but that's not what you do, then I just don't want to try to convince someone. It's not worth it. So I prefer to let other people have their own mistakes, and if they have to stay, like I said, Leslie rode home, and it wasn't just one time that horse did it to him. He had to ride home 2 hours a couple of times. That horse put him to it. And
oh my gosh,
that's, deal with your misery, I guess.
Wow. Well, on that note, that I know these are really, you guys, such good questions that you submitted. And I think there's so much, like, we could talk about this with so many different professionals. I'm sure everybody would have a different opinion on it. And it's just, it sounds like it's a lot of practice makes perfect with a lot of this stuff. So
I think that something like this is really good, but I think it's also like, I would go and talk to 30 professionals that have to, because we all have to deal with it, and then figure out which one works for your horse and which one works for you. And there's probably 5 different ways it'll work. But there's all sorts of, I actually learned one a couple of years ago from a really good professional in Kentucky. And she just told me what she did. And she was like, I had never thought it would work. And it worked. And so there's these, like, all sorts of different little tricks and things, but I think those are things that I think is important to have the conversation. So you're discussing, and there can be the back and forth on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it's not as easy as, the violence is not the answer. But you might feel like violence is necessary, but violence isn't the answer. But I always recommend a lot of swearing. I think that's good for every situation, honestly.
Makes you feel better. There's not a lot of, no one's harmed by swearing. So I think we can all get behind that. Wonderful. Well, Jen and Kyle, thank you so much for sharing your Tuesday evening with us and your expertise with us on this subject. There are so many more aspects of trailering that we could cover, and we will cover in future Ask an Expert episodes. But thank you guys for taking the time and answering all these questions for us.
No problem. Just again, to reiterate, slow in the turns. You can, you accelerate and braking, take your time. And then I drive fairly quickly with the trailer. I'm not like a 55-mile-an-hour person, but gives a lot of space to the trucks or the vehicles in front of you. And then when you do that, know that people are going to cut in front of you for that space, because they'll be like, oh, look, there's room there. And you immediately have to give more space. Well, you're swearing about the person just doing that, but they don't. And if you're coming over the crest of a hill, again, just like take the foot off the gas as you go over the crest, just to make sure if you need to slow down a little quick, because there's traffic on the backside that you can take care of it. But extra careful with the safety, because those trucks and trailers, no matter how well you think things work, they're just not nimble,
Yeah, that's great advice. Wonderful. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Jen, I hope you feel better. Thank you for joining. No worries at all. I'm sorry that you don't feel well. And everybody who submitted questions, you're the best. Have a wonderful evening, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. We're done. Good job, guys.
Okay.
You
Well,
guys are only 44% uploaded, so it might take a second. And if it doesn't work, I can pull it from another place, so don't worry about it.
I think it worked last time, so hopefully if I just leave it open, it'll keep uploading.
Perfect.
So you think so? The mic is why that does that then.
I mean, I'm using the exact same mic as you guys, and it's not happening. I don't know. I honestly, it might be just the combination of the computer and the mic. Next time, I mean, I could hear you guys totally fine without the mic. So next time we could do your iPad and go back to that setup.
Yeah, because obviously once we unplug the mic, I mean, I've still got this you aren't being recorded troubleshoot thing, but it